If you're interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and in this episode, we're going to take a look at the concept of viral negativity and how building our mental immunity is vital to spiritual well-being. I've mentioned this before, but our world is going through a massive shift. And no, I don't mean the mental masturbation of political punditry that some who are apparently and suddenly political scientists have been engaging in. Every political season, I am shocked by how many political scientists I know and geopolitical experts. I'm even more shocked at how many have been educated solely through memes and have managed to avoid ever reading a book. It's fascinating stuff. I had no idea I was swimming in such deep waters with some of the great thinkers of our time. So no, I don't mean politics. I'm talking about something deeper. Politics are a ripple in the pond, but I'm referring to something that comes from a spiritual place, an interdimensional place. These shifts are happening on a spiritual level. And I believe that everyone is experiencing it in some way, shape, or form. We're all going through a shift. For many of us, the way we look at the world, the way we see our lives and how we spend our time is changing. And it's changing in a more drastic way than it ever has in the past. And that change is rendering so many aspects of our culture obsolete. And that is to the dismay of a lot of the power structure and those who are beholden to it on some level. In my time on Earth, I believe that we've gone through several timeline shifts, times when we as a culture were headed in one direction and then events occurred that forced us to see things differently. I think that 9/11, COVID, the last 8 years have contributed to us shifting timelines. Remember, perception is reality. Perception means the way we regard, understand, and interpret things. So if something shifts our perception drastically enough, then we're looking at a shift in reality, a shift in our timeline. After these shifts, the world is suddenly a different place. These timeline shifts happen on a personal level, on an individual level, and some happen collectively, whether it's as a country or as a planet. And sometimes some of us shift timelines before others are prepared to join us. But then something always happens that shakes everyone awake and they eventually follow. And often the events that shake everyone awake, they're usually something considered bad, dangerous, or traumatic. And we see the truth of that in our personal lives because often something world-shattering happens, it jolts us awake, it shifts our perception, and suddenly we find ourselves looking at a completely different world. Sometimes it takes 10 years before we wake up or we look up and we say, wow, if that horrible thing hadn't happened, I would have never gotten here. And here might be, maybe you're in a very contented place and it might take time for you to look up and realize that that contentment is the product of just distress. So we find that distress and discomfort, it forces evolution. It forces growth. It forces change. It's apocalyptic. From a Christian perspective, the word apocalypse usually means the final destruction of the world, but it actually means to lift or remove the veil. which I suppose for some will feel like the destruction of their world. Reality will change. And this is why understanding the impermanence of things, the impermanence of three-dimensional reality is so completely vital. So what we're going to notice in these moments of cultural awakening or cultural apocalypse is that those who externalize their problems, who point to others as the source of their distress, will have a very difficult time. They struggle already. They struggle because they still believe they can control the behavior of others. They can't control themselves, so they seek to control you. Those of us who understand that we cannot control the behavior of others and instead focus on working with our own mind and going inward to change how we relate to the behavior of others will have a much easier time. We already do. Now, please understand that this doesn't mean that we don't have opinions or that we don't care. It simply means that we understand spiritual law. That's just how it is. It's lawful. Some are used to living with the knowledge of these laws and some are not. And even worse, some are confused by these spiritual laws when they are forced to abide by them. Some are prepared because they've done the work and some are not. Some go inward, connecting with the spirit and to the inner stuff, while others turn outward to the world of materialism. And I realize this sounds like some ominous prophetic warning, but the truth is that this is how it has always played out. However, I do believe that something significant is coming. I believe that what we consider reality will soon be shattered and upended. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be hard for some and at the very least, interesting for others. You see, this is a spiritual place, this human realm. This human birth is a spiritual experience, and the trouble some individuals have with this birth is due to the fact that this realm is one of personal responsibility and self-reliance. So think of it this way. If you take responsibility for what you put in your body, this temple that you've earned, if you fortify your immune system with proper unprocessed foods and exercise, then you are less susceptible to disease, infections, and cancer-causing chemicals hidden in our food, all of which are FDA approved. Yes, those are government-approved cancer-causing chemicals, in case you were wondering or keeping track. As a slight digression, because I gotta digress at least once in every episode. I remember my time in the punk scene. I've been thinking a lot about this. And back then, we didn't trust the federal government. In fact, we didn't trust any hierarchical system, or at least I didn't. We were skeptical. But now, many lab-grown chemical concoctions are accepted as safe simply because the power structure deems it so. In fact, it's consumed even more eagerly. It's like this show of bootlicking loyalty to the system. It's so fucking sad. Over the past few years, I've realized something. I was not surrounded by true believers in liberty and human sovereignty, but by a group of self-conscious, wayward youth who found it easier to fit in there than anywhere else. There was nothing to be earned there. You didn't have to be particularly talented to be accepted there, so it had a tendency to attract the unremarkable, for better or worse. I remember that when some of my little comrades found out that I did jiu-jitsu, they thought it was something that meatheads did, when the truth is that you can't hide on the mat. They were okay hiding behind a wall of screaming vocals and distortion pedals to kind of cloak their lack of musicianship, whereas a physical pursuit wouldn't allow for any of that sort of bullshit. Anyway, but here's the thing. Just as we need to question what we consume physically, we also need to examine what we take in mentally. The mind has an immune system. Mental immunity is a real concept. Just as we become lazy and grab the easiest option like fast food or gas station snacks, we do the same thing with information. Even worse, we do it with spiritual knowledge. Everything worth having must be earned. Knowledge that is easily acquired for a reason. Now, when I say earned, I don't mean that spiritual knowledge is gained at the end of some yogic version of a 5K obstacle course. I mean, it comes through practices like reading, meditation, pranayama, or some physical pursuit where dedication and perseverance might be required. And that looks different for everyone. If you've let your body fall into disrepair or you have a physical issue, a simple walk might be that challenge. Anything that makes you confront the lazy part of yourself that would prefer to put it off another day is valid. It counts. You know, people often view meditation as this relaxing activity. It's this relaxing thing to do. But if you've ever really sat in meditation, you know that being still is a very active practice. And you will definitely encounter that part of you that wants to cut corners. For me, the practice of japa is what prepared me to do the physical work needed to repair my body and get in shape. I'd become very depressed, very overweight, and very anxious. And there were many times when the last thing I wanted to do is chant or drive out to a temple on a Sunday. Even my time with Lama Losang was met with the same type of internal resistance. It was just like working out. Like there were times where I felt like I had earned a day off, right? A cheat day, which is crazy to think about when it comes to something important like spiritual practice, but it happens. The mind often looks for the path of least resistance, and it will do so at our peril. So overcoming that internal resistance, whether it's through meditation or chanting or some physically dedicated practice, it teaches us how to build the strength and resilience needed for true spiritual growth, for that deep down spiritual growth. One of the ways that that growth happens is by noticing when the body tightens, observing the mind as it comes up with these excuses, and in spite of that, in spite of the tightening, in spite of the excuses, engaging in our practice anyway. It goes back to something I've said 100 times. Show up for the practice, and the practice will show up for you. The practice benefits the self. With a capital S, the soul. Any negative, lazy, or fearful thought is a thought of the body, of the organism. But the thought that despite our discomfort, we are going to fearlessly engage with our practice, regardless of the lazy excuses of the conscious mind, that's the divine mind, the mind of the soul. The more we entertain the mind of our true self, the mind of what we truly are, the more we receive those thoughts, those signals, those messages. The body begins to relax into those ideas, regardless of the fears that the conscious mind might have or might be programmed for. Yes, programmed for fear. There's a phenomena in the human mind called negativity bias, or the negativity effect. It's the tendency for negative information to outweigh positive or neutral information in the mind. It's a natural response, and it makes sense if we view it from an evolutionary psychological perspective. So negative data at one point kept us alive. This predisposes us to be naturally susceptible to negativity. Remember, although we are spiritual beings, we are inhabiting an organism, and the organism has biological imperatives that result in phenomena like negativity bias. What this means is that since our minds naturally latch on to negative information, basic awareness that's brought on by meditation is the first line of defense against contracting a mind virus. These mind viruses weaken our mental immunity. However, meditation creates space in the mind. It promotes discernment. It allows us to observe thoughts as they kind of come up to the surface rather than believing every single thing that floats to the top. Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind transformation and restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. you don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. Just as a virus enters the body and takes control of certain mechanisms and replicates itself, negative thoughts about who we are, negative philosophical and political points of view, they operate the same way. One negative idea begins to influence the other ideas and replicates itself. For instance, if you believe X, then Y and Z must also be true. So what happens is we start to apply faulty negative thinking to other phenomena that arise in the mind in the form of thoughts and memories. And this brings us back to perception, the way we regard, understand, and interpret the world around us. Perception shapes everything. To illustrate this, let's imagine that the subconscious mind is an operating system, like in a computer. It's running in the background and it's shaping our experience of reality. In this analogy, the conscious mind, our active thoughts, the ones we're aware of, those function like software and applications. The negative data that we receive from sources like media, politicians, and our meme-educated friends are like corrupted files. These downloads disrupt the operating system. Just as a computer's operating system works outside of our immediate awareness to manage the essential functions of the computer, the subconscious mind operates beneath the surface. It continually manifests our reality. Manifest means to show or reveal, to put on display. The subconscious mind or operating system reveals a curated version of reality to us. It puts a world on display for us. So to further extend this analogy, the autonomic nervous system is like the human body's operating system. It runs in the background. It manages vital processes such as heartbeat, digestion, and it does it without any conscious input. And this connection is crucial as the subconscious mind signals the body on what to feel, communicating through the autonomic nervous system. The body, in turn, informs the conscious mind on what to think, how to perceive, and how to interpret experiences. So yes, your body, its health and welfare is important to how the mind functions, and vice versa. The way you think will affect how your body feels. Now, while body positivity is great, if your body is ill and not functioning properly because you've abused yourself and let it fall into disrepair, then your mind will suffer. Since the mind is of a spiritual nature, the health of your body is important to your spiritual development. And if this statement conjures up, images of jacked, fit, muscle-bound, toxic males simply because it's coming from the mouth of a man, then you may want to examine why your mind is relating to those words in that way. I heard a great point made by the comedian Ricky Gervais the other day. He was on some, ridiculous show with a group of unremarkable hosts sharing their unremarkable views. And he said, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right. I can't tell you how much I loved hearing that. I've sat with so many teachers in my life, and all of them have hurt or offended me at some point, some more than others. And it wasn't that they were trying to hurt me. It was simply that I hadn't evolved enough at the time to fully understand what they were saying. However, after many years, those little nuggets would land and make perfect sense. It's like what Ram Dass used to say. If you say something that hurts me, that's my problem. Now, I'm sorry if that's, not what some of you would like to hear, but these things are lawful. It's, again, spiritual law. What the body feels, the mind will perceive. And what the mind perceives, the body will feel. Your perception is your reality. It's your experience. And your perception is your responsibility. When our mental immunity is weak and we allow unhealthy negative information into the system, it can lead to serious issues. Just like corrupted data, back to our computer analogy, can compromise a computer's performance, these negative thought patterns can and will compromise your mind's performance. And if this reality is a manifestation of our own mind in the way we think and perceive, then yeah, it's important. You should pay attention. So just as exposure to different germs builds up physical immunity and helps prevent illness, exposing ourselves to diverse information strengthens our mental defenses, and it makes us more resilient. This expands our consciousness. It enriches our decision-making process, but with one caveat. This is only applicable if we are seeking truth. If we're only looking for comfort, reassurance, and confirmation, then this process can be very disturbing and unsettling. Because when we begin to see flaws in our perception of something, the system reacts by contracting in fear. The system by the nervous system, the mind, the whole thing. Fear is the organism's way of tightening in response to a perceived threat that could compromise a fundamental biological imperative. A fearful mind sees fearlessness as a danger. Fearful people are afraid of fearless people. The mind will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven every time. I know I've said this a million times. So right now, within American culture, it's especially important to engage in the practice of the broader consumption of ideas, the fearless examination of perspectives. It's vital to consider points of view that you would probably normally dismiss. Read something with an open mind. It's like the Andre Gide quote, "No lands were ever discovered without losing sight of shore." You know, one of the most common allegories in literature is the idea of being exiled. For instance, in the Mahabharata, the brothers must be exiled in order to make their triumphant return. In fact, that has to happen for the Bhagavad Gita to even exist. For Krishna to convey this life-changing information, Arjuna, one of these brothers, must be exiled to face the battle. In the Ramayana, Ram must be exiled to the forest so that he has a chance to defeat Ravana, who's currently destroying heaven. And similarly, in the Bible, the Israelites must wander the desert to reach the promised land. These are classic allegories, and they can be interpreted in many different ways. In fact, I suggest perceiving the idea of opening your mind to thoughts outside of what you'd normally entertain as a form of being exiled from your own familiar ways of thinking. That's how you grow, and that's how the negative force of energy within your own mind can be defeated. Think about how many times you've been in the situation where you were at odds with someone, you spent some time communicating, and then emerged with a completely different perspective. Personally, it happens to me all the time. That's Plato's dialectic for those of you that fancy yourselves Stoics, though your Stoicism seems to be regulated to easily digested memes. Again, we're back to memes. If you haven't had this experience, try communicating. Just ask questions with genuine curiosity and not in a way that reinforces your ideas. So open your mind and just ask legitimate questions. Just yesterday, I had one of these conversations with someone. They don't know how I feel about them because I'm a nice person. I'm not rude. But yeah, I'm not a fan. Well, we started talking about some things that we had in common interest. It was really cool. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to be their best friend or have them over for dinner, but it did soften me around them. It softened me to who I perceive them as a person, which makes my experience easier, you know? And you know what? If you engage in this practice, you might find that you are correct in your beliefs. You might feel even more sure, or even find out another angle as to why you want to double down on your point of view. Or something even cooler happens, and you change your mind completely and get exiled from your negative perception. Personally, being wrong is always exciting because now you have the challenge of figuring it all out again. And well, I mean, it's fun if you're interested in finding truth, but if you're only interested in preserving a point of view, then I guess it kind of sucks. I've really tried to implement Plato's dialectic. It's about mining for truth through just basic conversations and asking good, thoughtful questions. And these questions aren't meant to poke holes in anything, but they're meant to better understand things. It's not a debate, it's a conversation. That being said, I realized that self-righteous anger is wildly intoxicating. That's a reason why they call self-righteousness the golden chain. There is a nice hit of adrenaline in being angry, much less self-righteously angry. But you got to understand, that is spiritually degrading. By engaging in these negative trains of thought, we feed them. We give them attention. We give this virus attention. We run the risk of being overtaken by a negative mind virus that eventually degrades us completely and turns us into a miserable pain in the ass. This is a very real thing, and we have to be careful. Having a negative thought spread through your mind is a very difficult thing to get rid of. We all know someone who is completely consumed by negativity. And look, there is a reason why sad songs are easier to write than happy ones, or sad poems, or whatever the thing is. As someone who has been a creative their entire life, I have always found that sadness was fuel for creativity. There's also the fact that I've also been so depressed I didn't create anything. So there's also that. But I think that's a different situation. So really, what's important here is the old adage of having the mind of a honeybee and not the mind of a housefly. A honeybee looks for sweetness, beauty, good things, and a housefly looks for rot. It looks for garbage. This is a wild time for us, and it's going to get wilder. Personally, I'm excited. I know that reality is about to have a massive shift. And like I said, if you're looking for truth, then wandering around in the desert and getting exiled to the forest far from the safety of your own habitual thinking is exciting. But if you're only interested in preserving the safety of the little cocoon of your own ideas about the world and your habitual points of view, then this is going to be hard. It doesn't have to be. But then you have to ask yourself this difficult question. Why shouldn't it be? Should it be easy? If you've done nothing for the health of your own mind, if you've been less than fully engaged in a spiritual practice, meaning sure, you're a good boy or girl and you sit in meditation from time to time, or yeah, you go to yoga, but you haven't spent any time with the vitally important literature that surrounds these practices and makes them whole, then this should be hard for you. Did you do everything you could do for yourself, or do you cut corners? Did you do just enough to fool yourself? These questions can be hard, I know, but spiritual practice is nothing if not a method of self-inquiry. You have to be fearless in this pursuit. The path up the mountain is long. Sometimes it's unbelievably steep, but it's worth it. If we can keep the mind of a honeybee and look for sweetness, look for beauty, and reject the mind of the housefly that looks for rot and garbage, then this path is beautiful. It's challenging, but there's so much beauty in that challenge. It takes time, but it's worth it. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support its creation, visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the various ways to get involved and support this work. Click the About button, read a little bit about me, and see what I have to offer you through the one-on-one sessions. Don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers, where we're building a community of everyday people with not-so-everyday interests. You'll also find the online apparel store. And as always, head over to the Participate button and join us. Together, we're growing a community of spiritual seekers just like you.